صوت البلد سوريا.
الله محيي الجيش، الله محيي الجيش، الله محيي الجيش.
It's been a busy week for Secretary of State John Kerry as he embarked on his first international trip since taking office. On the first week of this 11-day, 9-nation trip, the Secretary has been meeting with European allies to review the wider transatlantic relationship and to discuss issues of global concern, including Iran and Syria.
I'm proud to announce that the United States of America will be providing an additional $60 million immediately in non-lethal assistance to support the coalition in its operational needs day to day as it continues to organize and work for the political transition that we all want to see.
Arriving in London Monday morning, Secretary Kerry met with Prime Minister David Cameron for a productive working breakfast. Later, Secretary Kerry joined UK Foreign Secretary William Hague for a joint press conference.
Given the U.S. commitment to supposedly spreading democracy around the globe, how does this alliance sit with that commitment?
But it doesn't sit at all, does it? I think it highlights a sort of glaring hypocrisy which underlines the whole of US policy. And it's very interesting to compare the US policy towards Syria with that of Saudi Arabia. Because last February, the Syrian government announced a new constitution, a new democratic constitution that was going to allow for a multi-party system, free elections, etc. And what was the US response? It was to denounce it as a sham. President Assad was playing games. It was dismissed entirely. And the Saudis haven't done anywhere near as much as that in terms of democratic reform. The sort of reforms in inverted commas that they've introduced have been very, very tame. And yet the US has praised Saudi Arabia. So I think it shows, if you compare Syria and Saudi Arabia, the glaring hypocrisy of the US.
The Assad regime has rained down rockets on Aleppo in recent days. And that is just the latest example of Assad's brutality.
And the US allies in the region, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey, are already supplying them with arms. The New York Times has reported that the Saudis are supplying the insurgents with arms bought from Croatia. It has quoted unnamed US officials as saying that multiple plane loads of weapons have left Croatia for Syria's neighbors and are being smuggled into Syrian territory.
الله أكبر لله الحمد. كتاب فاروق حلب. الله أكبر. تدك عصابات الأسد في خال العسل. الله أكبر. رمي مباشر مدفع 122. الله أكبر. الله أكبر يا رب نصرك. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. لعيونك يا شهيد. الله أكبر. هي لعيونك يا أبو عبيدة. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
We condemn this indiscriminate killing of innocent civilians, and we condemn it in the strongest terms.
The whirlwind multi-nation trip continued as Secretary Kerry then traveled to Rome, where he met with NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen. On Thursday, Secretary Kerry met with leaders of the Syrian Opposition Council and partner nations to discuss the crisis in Syria and announce the additional measures of non-lethal support to the Syrian opposition coalition.
The members of the so-called Friends of Syria, known as enemies of Syria inside the Arab nation, have been seen taking a family photo with the head of the foreign-backed opposition, Mu'az Ahmed al-Khatib, in the Italian capital, Rome. Participants in the meeting, especially the US, promised to provide material support to insurgents fighting the Syrian government. Washington has pledged $60 million to the militants.
This funding will allow the opposition to reach out and help the local councils to be able to rebuild in their liberated areas of Syria.
A group of anti-war activists has gathered near the Italian Foreign Ministry, the venue of the meeting, questioning the real intentions of the so-called Friends of Syria.
The stakes are really high, and we can't risk letting this country, in the heart of the Middle East, be destroyed by vicious autocrats or hijacked by the extremists.
هذا الذي كان يقتل أطفال الله أكبر على كل طغى وتجبر. هذا مصير الشفيع هذا مصير. عن رفضنا المشروع التآمري ما سمي الائتلاف الوطني، وتم الإجماع والتوافق على تأسيس دولة إسلامية معادلة، ورفض أي مشروع خارجي من ائتلافات أو مجالس تفرض علينا بالداخل من أي جهة كانت، والله ولي التوفيق.
And we stand with those Syrians fighting for the right to choose dignity and democracy and justice.
Stay tuned for updates from the Secretary's stops in Ankara, Cairo, Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, and Doha.
Distinguished members of the press, His Excellency U.S. Secretary of State, my dear friend, Mr. John Kerry, it's a pleasure to have you in our beautiful country and in our capital city. And it's a privilege for us to be able to host you or accommodate you in this very historical landmark.
We also continued the discussion that we had yesterday in Rome, an important discussion about how the international community can come together in support of the Syrian people in an effort to try to create a political transition and provide those people with the safety, security, and freedom that they deserve. Minister Davutoglu and I, along with our partners, believe that there is no legitimacy in a regime that commits atrocities against its own people. We also discussed the importance of strengthening the protection of fundamental rights, the freedom of expression, freedom of the media. And history has proven decisively that nations that work constantly to safeguard these rights, democracies, people who respect basic freedoms, are far more successful, far more stable, and far more prosperous.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says the Obama administration is rewarding the Egyptian government with financial aid because of Cairo's promises of economic and political reforms.
Protesters torch Egypt police station in Port Said as U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry lands in Cairo for talks.
He was due to meet with various Egyptian political parties after he arrived today, but the main opposition leaders from the National Salvation Front, including Mohammed Baradei and Hamdin Sabahi, are refusing to meet him. Now, this is a protest because, according to them, the US are backing Egypt's Islamist President Mohamed Morsi, no matter what he does. They're saying the US wants democracy in Egypt, but Washington does nothing about the Muslim Brotherhood dominating power here. Now, their view is that Washington is only thinking of its own interests in the region, particularly Israel's security. They're also accusing the US of striking some sort of a deal with the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, another bone of contention is that the Egyptian authorities have just bought $2.5 million worth of tear gas from the US while the country's on the verge of bankruptcy. And that tear gas, they say, is being used against protesters here.
Your guest from Washington said that al-Ibrahimi came to Assad and proposed things that President Assad refused. Let me tell you very clearly that what happened is that al-Ibrahimi, the United States, Moscow, and Russia, of course, and the Syrian government have all agreed on the Geneva Communique. The Geneva Communique regulates what the West calls a transitional period in Syria. The Geneva Communique, which everyone agrees on, now the Americans think, because they can give more weapons to the insurgents, they think they can turn it back. The Geneva Communique mentions nothing about the president stepping down, and this is why they want to overturn it. It wasn't the president who turned against previous agreements. It was the Americans who thought by their arrogance, by their very well-known arrogance, they can turn the table on everyone, as they're trying to do right now. The new $60 million will be joining many millions before that were spent by the United States of America, the United Kingdom, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey to fund the armed groups in Syria. Among those, there are many terrorist groups who are using them to fund terrorist operations like the explosion we witnessed in Damascus last week in al-Mazra'ah area. So I think the term non-lethal aid should not be applied here. And something else, before you said that the president is counting on the support of his sect to kill all the Syrians. This is untrue, sir. Get your information. The president has the support of many Syrians, including the Sunnis, the Christians, the Ismailis, the Alawites, the Druze. Many people support the president, and at the same time, not all the Alawites support the president. Some of them are against. It is immoral, illegal for the United States of America to step in and send arms to a party in Syria that it thinks has a right in ruling the country. It shouldn't do that. This is completely wrong. And one final point, when you say it was the government who turned its guns against its people, I think you should get your facts straight. By the early in the protest and almost 18th of March on 2010, there has been dead soldiers among the riot police, dead conscripts among also the riot police and the riot control, and they died. They didn't die because the protests were peaceful. They died because some people inside the protest decided to take up arms and shoot at the police at that time. The army was not involved then. You need to get that straight, actually, sir. Now, I asked something, and this is very important to me as a Syrian. Who gives the American administration the right to interfere in our internal affairs? Who gives it the right to say that this president should go and this president should say? Who gives it the right to interfere even in Egypt? Your guest is saying we pushed Mubarak to go to leave his post, and they want Assad to do so. It's not their position. It's not the position of any foreign country to say that the president of Syria or the president of any sovereign nation should step down.
I want to concentrate on the type of arms that are being sent into Syria right now. Even if it was a situation that the United States wants to change the government in Syria, do you think that that would be something that would increase security in Syria? I mean, what exactly does the United States have in mind? We have tens of thousands of Syrians being killed now through these 2 years, with bombs going off, infrastructure being destroyed. And yet the United States keeps saying that their goal is the protection of the Syrian people.